All right, all right, all right, all right. We are ready, 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 ready. It is 7:29, and you know we're going to get started at 7:30. So the countdown has begun. The countdown has begun. We're recording. We can see clearly. We have our speaker in the house, and life is wonderful. All right, it is 7:29. By the time I finish this sentence, I pray it will be 7:30 because you know I like to start on time. And for those who are going to be coming into the room, I'll be letting them into the room. But I am super, super, super excited because I have the opportunity to sit back and learn and listen. And you know, I can flip over from being a leader to a student real quick. And so we have none other than Dr. Laticia Tish Thompson, and I'm going to let her take it from there. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Karen. I really want to extend my appreciation to you and the Sister Leader community for holding space for these types of conversations, helping organizations impact the people side of their business and help to foster profitability while doing so. So that's my space, that's my lane in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. So employee engagement is one of the clearest signals leaders have about whether people are connected to the work, to the workplace, and the direction of the organization. Yet, it seems to be the most elusive to sustain and improve. Today, we will discuss the difference between culture, climate, and engagement and the factors that influence them and how to comprehensively measure it. So, welcome to the conversation. I am the founder and chief business psychologist for a consulting practice that I began, 12 years ago called Legacy Blueprint. I am Dr. Tish, and I am bringing you greetings from Chicago. I know we have folks who are coming into the room. I want to kind of get a sense of who is joining us. So if you could drop in the chat where you're joining us from and what role you play in impacting the people side of business. So if you could just drop that into the chat, that would be really, really helpful for me as we navigate this conversation. And welcome in, and welcome to the conversation. Why is this conversation important? Globally, only about 1 in 5 employees are engaged at work. 1 in 5. In the US, engagement is sitting around 31% engagement. When we start talking about management engagement, that drops even more severely to 27% in 2024, and it dropped even further in 2025 to 22%. And this data comes from Gallup. They are the trailblazers as it relates to measuring employee engagement in this space. So why does this all matter? When we think about the level of engagement that we have, why is it that for the last 10 years, we have seen engagement continue to plummet? The conversation that we're going to have today is, what are the right questions we need to ask in order to understand what's at play, and how do we begin to measure properly? Oftentimes, when organizations are having conversations, the question that they ask is, are people engaged? That's the impetus for selecting an engagement tool to measure engagement. The question is, are people engaged? But if we really want to get to the heart of the matter and we really want to start to improve engagement from that 31%, a more poignant question is, what's happening in our culture and our climate that's shaping how people choose to show up? So I'm just going to pause for a moment. I'm going to take a look at our chat to see where our folks are coming from. So we have an entrepreneur, we have a leadership coach, coach in Chicago. Awesome, awesome. Welcome in. Glad to have you part of this conversation. So when we think about this question about what is happening in the culture and climate that is shaping how people show up, I'm curious / nosy as a facilitator. So if you want to come off the chat and share with me What are some of your thoughts around what's happening in culture and climate that is shaping how people show up? You can come off of mute. You can drop it in chat, wherever you feel comfortable.
I I'd like to add to the conversation if I can.
Awesome.
I think the fact that we're doing so much online is definitely impacting our interacting face to face, and so that's impacting our culture in the workplace for those of us who do go into the workplace, because people are seem to be more adverse to face communication, and then the preference is texting and more offline communication.
Mm-hmm. And when we think about how we measure that, when we look at the different tools, we find that in the research that tools don't quite get at what you're talking about, Dr. Karen. And so that's why it's important for us to really dig deeper and get underneath what is the root cause of why we're not seeing improvement in engagement, and where we want to look first is climate and culture. But what are some of the measurement traps that we often see organizations finding themselves in? Too many constructs into one score. So instead of just assessing engagement or culture or climate or leadership out, they try to blend everything into one construct. And so it's important that we segment how we're assessing each of those different dynamics so that we're laser focused on how to fix it. Second measurement trap is we treat the score as the problem. And we are very quick to punish people for the score before we understand what is at the root of causing the results in the first place. Third measurement trap is we measure it, but we miss the norms. So the survey capture how people feel in the moment, but we're not understanding the behavioral side of things. We're not understanding what the experience is like for employees within their workplace. Fourth, we collect the information, we ask people to give their feedback, but we don't do anything with it. And so then people are very sinister, have this horrible feeling about giving their feedback moving forward because they say, well, shoot, what the heck for? Because you're not going to do anything with what I tell you in anyways. Number 5, we benchmark against others instead of culture strategy required, what our culture strategy requires. And what we mean by that is we take a look at what's happening across our industry versus really getting clear about what's important to us within our culture to be successful. So if we look at benchmarking against other companies within our industry, we say, oh, we're better than average. But what is that really telling us in terms of how effective we are in advancing our own strategy? And finally, we prescribe actions before diagnosing the pattern. How often have you been in organizations where they roll out the employee engagement results and folks quickly sit down and say, okay, we need to fix this by doing X, Y, Z, versus really getting underneath to figure out what are the patterns that we're seeing? How are people showing up? It's not about having more training. It's not about just having listening sessions, but what are the patterns of the behaviors that we're seeing within our workplace? So those are some of the measurement traps that I wanted to share. Are there ones that you have seen or experienced within your organization in terms of how we measure engagement and where we get ourselves in trouble? Curious/nosy, talk to me.
I again, I want to participate in the discussion. I think another trap is um, where the information, how we gather the information,
Mhm.
because it is a lot of the surveys are supposed to be anonymous per se, but there are various tags that's associated with the collection of data. And so, because of that, the data isn't pure data because people know it can be traced back to them. And
Mhm.
so once they know it can be traced back to them, then they're less likely to be 100% honest. And so when you get that, the results of that survey, The trap is that it's not pure data because the process is not truly anonymous, where people don't feel free to be honest in the process.
I would completely agree with that. And I think how that shows up are in the participation numbers. And when you look at the participation numbers, when they're low, that's an indicator of what's happening in the environment. But oftentimes organizations will blow past that and say, oh, we need to offer more pizza parties and incentives for people to complete the survey. No, that's not it. We have to take a deeper look at what's causing people to say, I'm going to sit this one out, and spend some time exploring that. Curious to hear from other folks on the call, and I'm not shy about calling folks out because I know many of you who are here. So talk to us. What are some other measurement traps you see within organizations, rather ones you consult with or ones that you are currently working in? I'm going to take my screen down so I can see everybody.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Steve Brown. I'm out in Denver, Colorado. I guess I was trying to, just absorb everything that you're saying and all that, so I can give you a response that makes some sense here. But so we're talking about the traps we get into when we're collecting information. Is that correct?
Right. When we're trying to
Okay.
measure the
When we're
employee
trying to measure the
experience.
employee experience. So the thing that I really gravitate to is people will not engage because they're used to the type of feedback or lack of feedback that they get in response to to the information that they give. So
Mhm.
they could adopt the attitude that, well, this is the same thing, and nothing's going to change and all that. And on the flip side, I have witnessed leaders in divisions and departments getting their information from Gallup or what have you, and then doing the wrong thing by shaping that information into a narrative that they can deal with personally. And on top of that, we're just having problems with truth these days, to be quite frank with you all. And so we have a lot of factors that are kind of being thrown at us in terms of, how can we make sure that that the way to give feedback, we're meeting people where they are, and they can provide that feedback. B, we take that information and we try not to sanitize it. We try to
Mhm.
um, we try to extract whatever truth it's telling us, and then we also involve the folks that gave the feedback in on the solution, uh, perhaps. And so that's kind of what I sort of have to say about this particular topic. Hopefully, I'm tracking
You're
what
tracking.
the topic is. Okay.
You're tracking. Thank you, Steve.
Mhm.
And all of that is are the different traps, and that's why I appreciate this conversation because it just really adds color to the discussion that we are having. Get my-
So I have a question, a thought. Number one, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good, good. So when you talk about the measurement trap, one of the things that comes to mind is what are the factors of engagement that we're actually measuring?
Hmm.
So does that mean participating in team meetings? Does that mean responding on Slack? Does that mean showing up for the team lunch? Um, what are those factors? What are the important factors that are, significant to the team and the culture? And then one of the other things that kind of comes to mind is it's also time bound. So what I mean is that during a particular amount of time, the engagement might fluctuate based on what's going on in your life, what's going on at the workplace, et cetera. And so if you're measuring during a particular time when somebody isn't at their best, then it's going to distort the results. And so those are some of the traps and the thoughts that come to mind.
And I really appreciate you bringing those up because what you just described are point in time, assessing individuals at a point in time. And in that point in time, they could have, been upset that morning or or in an amazing mood that morning, whatever the case might be, that might skew the results. And so that's why it's important that we take a deeper dive into what's happening in our environment in order to get laser focus on what's at the heart of it. So let's talk about culture, climate, and engagement and the difference. So when we think about culture, culture are those expectations around behaviors. It's the norms, it's the unwritten rules, it's how we do things around here. That's the culture. The climate is then what does it feel like to be in this environment? So how do people experience the environment day to day when they come into the office, or if they're engaging virtually? What does it feel like? And engagement is how people choose to respond to the environment in which they get to do their work. So do people lean into the environment that has been created, which is the climate, or do they pull back from it because of the environment that has been created? So here's another way of thinking about it. Culture sets the room. Climate is the temperature. And engagement tells us how people are leaning in. It talks about their agency. It talks about their discretionary effort that they want to lend into the environment. Do I want to give fully of myself because I feel like I am in an environment, in a climate that is conducive for me to do so? Or do I pull back because it doesn't make sense for me to give the best version of myself? Oftentimes when we're looking at engagement, or we're looking at how to improve the experience, we want to go directly to the engagement, that felt need, the experience that they had in that moment. What we fail to look at is what's happening in our climate and what's happening in our culture that influences the engagement. Oh, my slides are acting weird. Hold on. Go back. All right. So if we had to kind of pull up and talk about culture in action, what does it look like? And I know there's a lot here on the slide, but I wanted to provide a lot of different examples because it's something that you can take with you as you're even having conversations within your organization. When we think about healthy culture, because it's both sides, right? When you're in an environment where there's healthy experiences, and you're also in an environment where there's strained experiences. So healthy culture is people know what behaviors and values are expected within the environment. Candor is respected, even when the message may not be a popular one. Leaders within a healthy culture, they model the behaviors that they're expecting from others. On the other side of it, when we think about a strained culture, people have to guess at what really matters. And so what that does is it creates that natural byproduct that people lean on their own devices in terms of how they should show up within the culture because it's not clear. People avoid hard conversations to protect themselves. Leaders say one thing yet reinforce something else. And so that is indicative of what's happening within the infrastructure of an organization. And then mistakes are hidden, and people are often blamed, and those behaviors are repeated. So these are elements of a strained culture. When we think about climate in action, there's the healthy side and then there's the strained side. So when we think about the healthy side of climate, people understand the priorities and expectations. They start to feel like the environment is trustworthy. They feel like honesty is something that can be expected. It's not something that they just happen to trip over or it's a blip. If we think about strained climate, people are feeling overloaded, overwhelmed, underappreciated. Accountability feels like it's an option and not an expectation. The environment causes people to want to withdraw, which then creates burnout, and people are really quick to want to quietly exit the organization. And finally, if we think about engagement in action, so this is how people choose to use their agency, their energy to show up in the organization. Healthy engagement is people will raise their hand and give and offer that discretionary effort to contribute to the environment. Employees will speak positively about the organization and the organization's future. They will readily recommend their organizations to others to receive care or to get service. People see a future for themselves within the organization. So when we think about healthy engagement, this is the anatomy of it. These are the tenets of healthy engagement. And on the other side, we have strained engagement. And we all know what that looks like. So I talked about that 31% of employees being engaged in the workplace. If only 31% are engaged, think about the percentage that's disengaged. And the more striking percent of that disengagement is the 17% that's actively disengaged, meaning they are being very intentional about creating an environment where that they're in, that they just are choosing not to engage. So people do minimum required to get through the day. People stop offering ideas because they just don't believe it even matters anymore. Employees begin to emotionally leave before they actually physically leave. When we look at turnover data of employees coming in the door, we see first year turnover being incredibly high, but truth be told, they've decided that it's no longer a fit in their first 90 days. But they've retired in place all the way up to a year. And so those are the environments of strained engagement. So I want to pause there, and I'm curious to hear thoughts from our group around engagement in action, culture in action, and climate in action. Thoughts, questions, yeah, buts.
Yeah, I'm completely tracking with, these characteristics of all the three dimensions. But my brain goes to, okay, well, I sort of lean into that whole Six Sigma thing about these are the definitions of things. And there's the measurement piece to it. How do we measure it? How do we then analyze that data? And then we move into improve and control. So in my head, Tish, I keep thinking, is there some sort of three-dimensional method that you use? And if I'm jumping ahead, I apologize. Is there some three-dimensional method that you use that, because each of these has there's a intersection, with the healthy environment versus the strained environment, then the other two have their intersection too. I'm just really curious about how you break that down to then get to a solution, um, and prioritizing those solutions based on this information. I mean, I get all of this, but how you're defining the healthy versus engaged. I'm sort of a do it person, as you know, and I'm just thinking, how does she get to the not the low hanging fruit, but the stuff that really matters to people and get them back involved in the actual solution. And if I'm jumping ahead, I apologize.
So yeah, you. It's as if you saw my slides, Steve, because that's exactly where we're going. Because it's important for us
Okay.
to understand one, the difference between culture, climate, and engagement. Because
Mhm.
oftentimes, to your point, when we're measuring it, we integrate the three of them, and so
Yeah.
we don't get at the heart of what's happening because we have not segmented it properly. So there
Hmm.
is a more effective way, more comprehensive way to really measure what's happening at the engagement level, what's happening within our climate, and what's happening at the culture level that informs how people are choosing to show up. So
Yeah.
I wanted to just kind of level set with here's what it looks like in action and how we define it. Rick,
Yeah.
I
It's
saw
not,
you come on screen. I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
that's all right. No, I was just curious if Dr. Karen and all the others are seeing what I'm seeing. This is a lot to measure. You know what I mean? This is a lot of stuff, in these three things. And I'm just kind of curious, what is the best way to kind of boil it down to those critical few things that, well, that an organization can try to fix and how to get there. But I'll be quiet because I know that you're
No,
probably
you're
gonna have
good,
those
Steve.
answers.
You're good. I love the conversation. I appreciate the conversation because that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in, and that's why this conversation is so important. Rick, I know you have my name on your
Yeah, well, I
on your
Yeah,
appreciate
I
you
was like,
sending me the
look, I was
link.
like, Tish,
Yeah,
you got a twin.
and I know people are confused right now, but that's all right. Um, I'm gonna, but I'm gonna. I had a similar thought as Stephen on the on engagement. You know, we can define culture and to some degree climate with, you know, with a group of people. But when it comes to how we draw the boils down to an individual level, you know, whereas somebody's definition of strain could be somebody else's definition of healthy. And so how the question I have is how do we reconcile that? Because one of the measurement traps is running to the average.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm just,
So when
I'm just,
we,
you know, I look at some of these, you know, there's quite a bit of folks. One of the things I see is inability to manage stress, for instance. Is that a sign of strained engagement, or is that a sign of I just don't know how to handle stress?
and it could be both and so the measurement that I'll share helps us to get more laser focused at what could be at the core. Because when we look at engagement, it's almost like closing your eyes and shooting at a target. And
Mm-hmm.
then we go and then we get the result and then we just go after just trying to just throw everything at fixing it without really understanding what's at the heart of it. And so what I'm proposing today is looking at how to measure these things in a way that gets to the heart of our environment so that we're creating environments where people want to show up with full discretion in the workplace. So so that we're actually getting right there. So getting to the root, you guys teed it up quite nicely. So when we think about assessment, I want to introduce some methodology or inventories called organizational culture and organizational effectiveness inventories. So these are actually evidence-based assessment tools that looks at what is your current cultural norms versus the ideal cultural expectations. Because organizations, they may think that their team members, their associates, their employees are aligned with culture. And so these assessments really take a look at what is it that you want, what is it that you want it to be, and what is actually happening within your culture. Same with climate. What are the conditions that are influencing the day-to-day behavior of people? And then finding leadership and the system factors that affect those effectiveness gaps, and then taking a look at what do people need and want when they're engaging in their environment. So I want to introduce the circumplex, and I know that this is you're like, what is that? It's super simple. So when we think about measuring our culture and the environment in which our culture kind of manifests, there are three different buckets, if you will, three different constructs that you want to think about. The first one is, which is the ideal, is to have a constructive, which is focused on development. So, and within constructive styles, there are four elements, and we'll see what those look like on the next slide. Coming clockwise, there are also passive or passive defensive styles, and then there are the four elements that align with the passive defensive, and then you have the aggressive, what can I get style. Ultimately, where we want to see organizations really prosper is in that constructive space. That's the ideal. But when we take a look at what is actually happening, it may be that their culture is more passive or their culture is more aggressive or a combination of the two. So let's take a look at what each of those different 12 elements are within the circumplex. So when we look at constructive styles, we're looking at things like develop, attain goals, developing oneself, an interest in developing others, which is that humanistic encouraging. Affiliative is developing relationships, so having those affiliate relationships within the organization. This is the sweet spot of culture. This is where we ultimately want to be. What we often see is that we see people or organizations within the passive defensive. And so what does that look like? So under approval, they just want to stay in good standing. They just want to say, you know what, I just want to look good. I just want to be approved of. So I'm not going to rock the boat. Conventional, I will go with the flow. If this is what the organization is saying is status quo, and that's what it is, then I prefer to just stay in this box. And also dependent is I'm going to stay in line because I don't feel comfortable or confident enough to step outside of it. So I'm just going to stay in line and do what I think is safe for me to do. And number 6 is just I'm going to stay out of the way. It's the avoidance tendency. And then on the other side of the final 4, under number 10 is get closure, perfectionistic nature. Competitive is get advantage over someone. Get the upper hand is power. So there are environments that have super strong power influence. And then oppositional is I want to get even. And so imagine environments, cultures that this is what's being bred within the environment. So then we have to ask ourselves, when individuals are super engaged, are they within an organization that have a more constructive style? Or if we're looking at our engagement results and we're finding that it is super low and we have a lot of actively disengaged people, could it be because we have some passive defensive and some aggressive defensive styles that are at play that as an organization we have never even considered? So when we start talking about getting to the heart of the thing, it helps us to look at the culture and what's happening and the climate that we're creating. So I want to show another view of this. So how does culture work? So you see on the far left-hand side, the espoused values. These are the things that we say are important within our environment. What influences that is our philosophy, our mission, our goals, and our strategy. And the bucket that you see in the center that says structures, systems, technology, skills, and qualities, these are what we call causal factors. So within this block, like under structure, I'll give you some examples. It takes a look at employee involvement. Under systems, it takes a look at fairness. How do we use rewards? How do we use punishment? Technology, and we talked about like this language, like, oh, we don't know if we really like technology. And I see you, Steve, give me 1 second. I don't know if we really like the word technology. It's more about job design. So under job design, how much autonomy do we give? Is there a freedom to give feedback? And under skills and qualities, this is taking a look at communication, base of power, and leadership. So these are all causal factors that's influencing the environment in which people work. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah. Could you go back to the previous slide just 1 second, please, Tish? So what I was thinking when I saw this slide, I was thinking of my business and how the aim is to integrate really low complexity AI with more traditional ways people are improving on their day-to-day work or operating in general. So I started thinking, how would I be able to use this? What do you call this circle again?
Complex.
Okay, how would I use this as a precursor to really, getting in, working with my clients and so that I can better understand where they are. But my question is, where is innovation in these 3 areas? Does innovation play a role in one of these 3 factors? And is that considered aggressive, or is it on the passive side, or is it a constructive element to an
So
organization?
that's a really good question. So when we think about innovation and we think about constructive styles, that's where that would sit. So when we think about developing and attaining goals, and when we think about developing ourselves, developing others, so that is in an effort to get to be better than what we were.
Mhm.
And so in that space, innovation is a really important part of that. So I would say that is the underpinning underneath the constructive styles.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Does
That's
it
my
does it
question.
call it out? Does it call
Mhm.
out innovation directly and intentionally? No. But when we think about the constructive styles, it's embedded there. The other place where you can see an indication that innovation does not exist is when you look under the passive defensive style, number 4, conventional. If we just
Mhm.
choose, if we have a culture of just staying in the box, that might be an indication that that our conventional our style is getting in the way of us innovating and moving to that next level.
And innovation, go right ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, can I speak to that while we're on just that part about because innovation is also risk taking. And when and looking at this and what I hear you're saying, you know, for having worked in an organization that you know, this is the way we've always done it type mentality. It is hard to be a person who is very innovative, trying to figure out what is the next in the market when you're working in that atmosphere because of that stay in the box type mentality. Um, and so as I am looking at this, the conflict, you know, the conflict, you can be one who is extremely and I always look at things in an innovative way. Like how can we exploit the gap in the market? How can we exploit the gap in the industry to create the next so that we can be the forerunner instead of the follower, you know? And it takes a degree of um, um, people can't be conflict avoidant when you have employees who are like that, because otherwise they'll end up leaving because it comes across as one, you're not being supportive, but now there's a conflict in really in how I think and how I lead and how I do business versus the atmosphere that I'm in. And so I really am glad that we did back up to this because many times for someone like me who's always trying to exploit the gap in the market, trying to figure out what the next is, I'm coming to the table with something that no one has ever heard of. A lot of times it's very little data to support it because it hasn't been done before. So I've pulled together and reconciled all the data that I could that can help lend an ear to what I'm talking about. But really, there's no benchmark to it because it hasn't been done.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and
And
so you need that mindset. You need the mindset because you don't have the data to support it, even though I'm geeky, I'm STEM, I'm a STEM girl, so data is my thing. But a lot of times you don't have the data yet. You're going to create the data when you become the first to do it in the market. You're either going to sink or swim. So I love this.
so imagine, Dr. Karen, that this idea around your posture is one of innovation. And the organization may say, yes, we're very innovative. Yet when they take a survey to assess truly what's happening, they may find that, oh no, we are incredibly conventional. And so when we have that level of intel about ourselves, what are we willing to do differently? So it really helps to paint a picture about who we really are versus who we say we are. And then it starts to fill in the gap of why does this feel different? It's because the data tells us that while we may think that this is who we are, this is truly how we show up. This is truly how we're creating an environment. So with this, it just shows the espoused values, kind of what we want our values to be, who we are, and those factors that influence it. So there are elements under the philosophy, mission, goals, and strategies that we actually measure to see alignment across each of these things, as well as the causal factors. And then the chart, the circumflex that you see here is what's actually happening. So you have the ideal, and then you have what's actually happening. And how is what's actually happening impacting at the individual level, the group level, which is department level, and the organizational level? So I think it was you, Steve, or Dr. Neal, that you talked about before. How do we begin to extract how the environment is impacting at each of the different levels of the organization? So when we look at the different assessments here to measure culture and to measure climate, that's where we start to get at the heart of what's being influenced. Is it structure, systems, technology, skills, qualities, and at what level are those things being impacted? So that's the beauty of the assessment. Now, you may say, well, shoot, that's a whole lot of measurement. So there are 31 items that we measure to take a look at what's happening within the climate. But the data that you get from that is so rich. And so now we're not closing our eyes and shooting at the target. We are laser focused on exactly where we need to go to address what's ailing and what's hindering the employee experience. So when we think about measurement, thinking about this philosophy of culture and climate, it helps us to not just focus on scores, but it helps us to focus on patterns, the patterns that's influencing how people choose to show up. So it helps us to be more strategic in how we address the culture and the climate. What is happening within our environment? What is it teaching people? How is it helping or hindering the strategy that we're after as an organization? So it's not measuring for the sake of measure. It's really looking at what are the patterns that we're seeing. So what questions need to be asked at the leadership level? So Steve, you said, well, gosh, if I want to utilize this as I'm thinking about engaging with my clients and assessing their readiness to engage with your AI solutions, some of these, it's not about are they engaged, but rather, what is our culture teaching people to do? Is our culture, the environment in which they're working, is it teaching people to be quiet? Is it teaching people to follow the status quo because that is what gets rewarded? Another question, what does your climate feel like right now? That's a different question than are people engaged? What does the environment feel like? When people, and some people, well, shoot, Tish, that is so esoteric. Like that's not concrete. That's not anything that we can wrap our arms around. It's a starter question. When you think about what the environment feels like when you walk in, everyone, no matter if you're a qualitative or a quantitative brain, knows what it feels like to walk in an environment that is giving life versus sucking the life out of you. Everyone knows what that feels like. So asking that question, what does the climate feel like right now, is a very relevant question. Question number 3, what are people doing in response of the climate that they're in? Are people rallying around each other? Are they supporting each other? Are they focused on developing themselves so that they operate at the top of their genius? What are people doing in response of the climate? Are people just doing their work and walking out? Are people during work hours looking for other jobs? What are people doing in response to the climate that they are in? Are they telling people this is a place that you do not want to work nor get care or get service? What are leaders unintentionally reinforcing? We may say that our culture is that we have an environment where we are a learning organization. Yet, if someone makes a mistake, they are severely punished. So what are we unintentionally reinforcing? We may say that we're interested in high quality. However, what we're pushing is higher productivity, getting more done in the least amount of time, which could compromise quality. Number 5, what patterns are helping or hurting performance, trust, and execution? So when we start thinking about impacting the employee experience, we have to go back to what's happening in the culture and the climate. So I'm going to pause. I love your thoughts, questions, and yeah buts related to these thought-provoking questions to dig deeper into why people show up the way they're showing up.
Yeah, I love this. I mean, it really takes the whole, once you go in to start dealing with a client and really getting to know what's going on in their organization, I sometimes use the old fashioned stop, start, continue kind of dialogue. This takes it to a whole different level. And I'm zeroing in on number 5 because that's what my business does, is trying to help organizations improve their performance. But what this line of questioning would do for me as an advisor, um, is helping me understand fully what's impacting their performance to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with that thread from culture to climate and all the other elements to it. So I have a real appreciation for this approach, definitely.
Other thoughts? Thanks for that, Steve. Other thoughts, questions, yeah, buts.
I love your year, but I haven't figured out how to entertain it yet. Yeah, but we know that they exist. I'm thinking, looking at these 5 questions, the subline is what leaders should be asking, but um, some leaders don't care to ask and don't care to know. And so when you have those type of leaders, they can't be informed by the feedback or the data because they really don't care what the answer is to these questions. And particularly if business is still like kind of limping along. And I say limping along because sometimes we can still meet sales goals, sometimes we can still meet organizational goals, but our people can be broken. And if you aren't paying attention, and if you aren't asking these questions, and if you aren't really in the moment, sometimes when you're walking among your workforce, then you won't know that now is the time to stop and kind of informally get the answer to some of these questions, like what does the climate feel like right now, particularly when there's been um, a major swap and change and replace in senior leadership. Of course, I deal with a lot of senior leaders, and there is sometimes a stop and a pause that's associated with a change in senior leadership, and there's a swap out and a replace when they bring their own people in, and there's some hiccups that happen in the productivity and in the momentum of the department and the division when there's a change in leadership. And for the new leaders that are coming in, they're so busy trying to pave the way, show their worth, prove that they are supposed to be there, particularly if they're new to the organization, that they don't have time to get the answer to these questions, because then if you get the answers to these questions, then now you've been informed and now you need to address it.
Yeah. And that's the conundrum of it all, right? It's indicators of the brokenness. I love that you said that, because when we think about our climate and our culture, it leaves receipts. And the receipts that it leaves is brokenness. That's one of the receipts. That's one of the indicators of the kind of environment that we're creating. And as we're bringing in new individuals to our organizations, are we clear enough about our culture to be able to articulate what it looks like to show up successfully as a leader? When you talk about people coming in and they have to prove their worth, what of our culture accepts that, and what of our culture says, no, that's not how we do things here. This is how you show your value in the most healthy way possible for our environment. These questions, these are great starter questions that lead you to a deeper conversation, but there might be others that you can come up with that really gets beyond just, are they engaged? Are they ready? What is the readiness of your team to engage in this change. There might be other questions that you could also come up with, but the point is, let's ask the deeper question that gets at what is the culture informing and what type of climate are we in. Here's the thing, research tells us that it's harder to change culture, but the easier thing to change is the climate. Because remember, our climate is within our control. It's the systems that we set up. It's our structure. It's our job design. It's how we develop skills and qualities within our bench. And so if you want to start to really shape the experience of the employees, it's looking at those causal factors that I shared on the previous slide. So this is the invitation. This is the invitation to dig deeper. So if our conversation today is one that is, making you curious about whether or not your organization truly is creating an environment and a culture where people can be successful, then I'm open to a conversation around how we can partner together to really effectively measure the culture, the climate, and the engagement to get to strategy achievement and sustainable change. So what does having that next conversation look like? So one could be just scheduling a conversation where we take this conversation and make it specific to your organization or your needs, to explore what data might you be missing in your measurement as you're thinking about the employee experience. Number two invitation to continue the conversation is, I'm happy to come and speak with your leadership team about your engagement data and what it might be telling you and how it might be pointing to some of those causal factors that we absolutely can wrap our arms around to really affect and impact the employee experience. Or finally, number three, continuing our conversation is to explore the assessments that I was telling you about. The organizational effectiveness assessment or the organizational culture assessment. Happy to sit down and talk about how we can spend some time really designing those in a way that we can get really focused on improving the employee experience so that we're not running another 10 years with dismal engagement within our organizations, because there's too much that is counting on our people being at the top of their game, feeling like they're fulfilled and feeling like they can offer the best version of themselves. And so I want to just pause for a moment. And I want to go back to what you were saying, Dr. Karen, about my yeah, but. So I love to invite people to challenge and battle test the concepts that I'm sharing. And so I often say what questions, thoughts, or yeah, buts, because the yeah, but is, yeah, Dr. Tish, that sounds good, but. So that's what the yeah, but is related to. So I want to just hold space for us to answer any questions that you might have about any of the conversation that we just had about climate, culture, and engagement. I'll take the screen down so that we can see each other.
I love the conversation. Of course, it's always good to have, but sometimes it's very difficult and people are afraid to have because they feel sometimes like the finger is pointing at them, particularly those of us that are in leadership, because the buck stops with us. But it's not always a blame game. It is what it is. And when you become aware of it, then you can do something about it if it is not going in a direction that you so desire. And so it's a necessary conversation to have on a regular basis, particularly I think when you have, different leaders coming in and out, because there's always a hiccup, impact of a change in leadership, and looking at how the culture is limping along or how the culture is progressing under new leadership and thriving under new leadership, because we also need to take notes in that situation as well. Um, but it's not always the blame game, but it is something that we need to measure on a regular basis. And I think particularly when there's a major change, and the change is not just in the talent. A lot of times the change is in a major change in processes of how you do business, because that impacts your people. And then also, obviously, since I'm a STEM girl, when you have a change in technology, you have those that jump on and embrace it, and then you also have those that are apprehensive and fearful and want to live in the past, and so they're half using it. And so you need to look at how that affects your area, the climate as you define it, and overall the big picture of the culture. Because I'm always looking at those three buckets: talent, processes, and systems. How are they working? What is the effectiveness of it? Like you said, are we doing as well as we think we're doing? Are we even assessing it or looking at it?
Yeah, I think of it with, factors that influence. Oftentimes we think that our employees are not engaged because they're just choosing not to. And we attribute their disengagement to they just don't want to. When in fact there are so many factors within our infrastructure that influences it. And that's the conversation we're not having. And it goes back to what you're saying about, we don't want anybody to look under our hood to see what's underneath it. We don't want people to be behind our curtains to see what's really going on. However, there's a cost to people not being fully engaged. There's a cost to people feeling like, I'm just going to give you my mediocre effort at best. And so when we can recognize that we can address that cost by looking at our infrastructure, then we're heading in the right direction. But we have to start asking different questions. Go for it,
Yeah,
Laticia.
but so this goes
All right, Dr.
this
Neal.
goes to something we were discussing before.
Yeah.
And it sounds from your presentation as you're putting the onus on the leaders. But part of that question that we talked about is, whose responsibility is it for the employees to engage? And what does that look realistically like on the ground? And some would say it's the employee's responsibility to get engaged and to innovate and to think outside the box and be present. But some would say, well, it's the leaders that take the lead and set the pace from the top and need to engage their employees.
Mm-hmm.
So where are we at on that question now? Is it the
So
leaders or is it the employees that are responsible to engage?
I am so glad you asked that question, because my perspective about that has not changed. I do feel like organizations put an incredible amount of emphasis on the leader to engage the employee, um, and there's less emphasis on the role that employees play in their own engagement. I still believe that's a conversation that needs to be had. For this, we think about, what role does an organization play in creating environments where people want to show up their best selves? What role does the leader play, and what role does the employee play? Our conversation today is looking at it from the slice of, what responsibility does the organization have, for a significant part of this, and then what role does the leader play? What role the employee plays, that's a whole nother conversation that we need to have. But the purpose of this is to embolden and equip our organizations to take responsibility for the role that they play in engagement.
Gotcha.
Rick, I saw you waiting patiently.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this through as a leadership coach, I looked at all of this through the lens of the organization. And in Dr. Neal's question, you and I have had this conversation around motivation, right?
Mhm.
I hear leaders all the time say, I can't motivate my team. And I say, well, it's not your job.
Mhm.
The only person that can motivate an individual is the individual themselves. However, I like the way this was laid out, because my answer is always, your job is to create a game worth playing. Their job is to decide how and when they're going to play it. So uh, especially the engagement, because oftentimes we look at the employee's engagement and what that means, and it means a lot because that's where the work is actually getting done. But how engaged are our supervisors, our managers, our directors? The people that are responsible for creating the game worth playing, because quite frankly, if they're half-assing it, that's going to flow downhill pretty quick.
Yeah, and their engagement is even lower. And I know we got like 2 minutes left, but when we look at the research that Gallup is offering up to us, our leaders are only 22% engaged.
Yeah.
So when we think globally, 31%, but then when we think about the leader level, it's only 22%. So they're even less engaged. And so, yeah, and it goes back to, well, how do I own my own engagement? And I would put that also, we would then look at them as the employee bucket is what responsibility do I have for my own engagement? So if everyone is playing their part, the organization is building the infrastructure and the leaders are creating a game worth playing, or, then I love how you said that. Then if we all play our part, then we'll see some improvement in this dismal employee engagement experience that we're seeing across our country. So with that being said, I know we have 1 minute. So I'm going to toss it over to Dr. Karen. But I just want to thank everyone for joining this conversation. I think it's a great starter conversation. If you want to continue the conversation, I am always willing to do so. This is something that I enjoy doing as a significant part of my work. So happy to take it to the next level. So Dr. Karen?
Awesome. What an awesome session. Thank you so much. And for those of you who knew some people wanted to be in the room, but they weren't able to be in the room, the replay will be in the free Sister Leaders community, which is open to men and women, everyone, to catch the replay. And so I'm not going to hold anybody any longer. Thank you. Awesome session. Dr. Tish, you rock. You are a great sister leader. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Take care.